my father of blessed memory taught here when Rabbi Pearl was the head of HAR, and so I had heard of the school, and I was somewhat familiar with it. But then after my father passed away, it wasn't that they called me and said, you know, your father has been a faculty member, now we want you to take his place. It was, I think, a few years later that a colleague of mine, who I knew from Yeshiva University, had been offered to teach Talmud, and he wasn't able to, so he recommended me. This was when Rabbi Emily Korsanik was the dean of the school, and so they contacted me, and I felt that it was a nice opportunity to continue, in a sense, my father's work, and at the same time to be of service in a setting that I wasn't so used to, in a pluralistic environment. But I thought it was a very good and interesting challenge for me, and I had to think about it and consult with some friends and some rabbis, and I got mixed feelings about it, but I felt it was the right thing for me to do at the time. So I went ahead and agreed to start teaching at the academy. That was, I think, about the year 1979 or 1980.
Did your teaching at the academy have any impact on you outside?
Well, not immediately. Later on, when people asked me what I do and where I teach, I would often get some negative comments. I would get questions like, did you speak to an Orthodox rabbi about doing that? And sometimes some more negative comments. Oh, you teach women Talmud, you know, how can you do that? Later on, at that time I was married. My wife didn't give me a rough time about it. But later on, after I got divorced and I was dating, I still am, but in those years, I had some potential shidduchim, potential marriage partners who felt that they could not support this activity, and so it didn't work out. But then I said to myself, well, if that's how they feel, it wouldn't be a good match anyway. But it did bother me a little bit that I wasn't fully accepted in the Orthodox world because of that. But otherwise, it's not. It hasn't been a hindrance beyond what I just told you.
What positive things did you find about the academy when you were there?
Many positive things. I liked the whole notion or idea that Jews can work together even if they don't follow the same practices with regard to halacha, and there's a sense of communal respect, there's a sense of learning from one another, there's a sense of desire to benefit the Jewish community, and there are different ways of doing it, and I wanted to be a part of that, and so I certainly felt personal benefit from that.
What differences do you see between the academy as it was when you first came and the academy as it is now?
Many differences. First of all, the most obvious one is the growth of the school. When I started, it was like a one classroom school, like in the time of let's say Abraham Lincoln, when all the students fit into one classroom in a log cabin kind of setting, and everybody was there, no matter what kind of age difference, background difference. So in those years, in the 80s, we had 8 students, 9, 10. Anything more than 10 was a big class. And pretty much everyone took the same courses. You had everyone on the same level, and it wasn't as serious a school as it became later on. So in terms of size, that's a major difference. Also in those years, it was a school only for rabbis, not cantors. We didn't have a cantorial school then. We had a few professors who taught a number of courses, and as I said, it was like one size fits all situation, so that even students who had no background in Talmud were put in the same class as those who had a few years of Talmud. So it was very difficult at that time. I think there was less of an emphasis then on academic achievement. You didn't have the same rigorous admission requirements as we have now, and you had also almost everybody graduated or was ordained in those years. We didn't have, as far as I can recall, qualifying exams, not when you came in and not when you left. As long as you got a passing grade, you would be ordained. And I think it wasn't in the general world, general Jewish academic world, the academy was hardly known, and not much attention was paid to it in those years. You know, obviously a lot has changed since then.
The Talmud teaches, and you just said, that we learn from our teachers, we learn more from our colleagues, and the most from our students. How has this been true for you at the academy?
I think it's definitely true. I've learned a lot from my students. I've learned the importance of pluralism, how it helps to have students learn one from another. Now that we have a cantorial school, and many of my students are also cantorial candidates, I find that there is more of a camaraderie, a sense of we're in it together, we learn from one another, respect for one another's achievements, and much of that has rubbed off on me as well. I've learned also that while knowledge is very important, but there are other things that are just as important in becoming a rabbi or a cantor, and the sense of friendship, learning from one another, as I mentioned, working together for a common cause. Many of the students have a interest in social, what I call social aspects of Judaism, to reach out to various communities and be able to be the only shul in a community where people come with different backgrounds or no backgrounds at all, and the ability to be successful in such a school where, in such a community where you're obviously not looking at a person's level of knowledge, but their commitment to their religion, to Judaism, coming to shul, participating, those are very important considerations in what makes a rabbi successful, and not just how much knowledge he can impart. So I came from a very academic background, both in Jewish learning as well as in Jewish studies. So to see that in a different environment, in a different setting, was something that I learned from, and I think it made me grow personally. So regarding the students that I had in those years, in the early years of the academy, in comparison to the more recent students, I would say that there is quite a difference. As I mentioned, the earlier students came in with hardly a need for background. Whoever wanted to come to the academy was more or less accepted. I remember there was one fellow who he was probably the one that the administration had the most concern about because of his affiliation with the Jewish Defense League, and they didn't want the academy to be associated with the JDL. So I remember at one of the faculty meetings we had way back in the 80s that issue was deliberated, but they let him stay as long as he didn't associate the school with any JDL activities. So it was interesting, as I said, to see what kind of background the students came from, and it was a challenge to try to find a way where I could teach students, whether it was Talmud or Mishnah or Halacha, to teach them when they had these different backgrounds. I think I learned from that too, although I can't say with any certainty whether it was successful at the end, because even though they all managed to pass, but they didn't have to have a they didn't have to have a great amount of knowledge and pass exams to show whether they had indeed learned what I taught. But still, the sense of unity among the students, the sense of mutual respect, that was certainly true at that time. And I think that was the greatest gift that we could bestow upon them. Now, it's a lot different now because we have certain criteria, requirements. The students have to come in with some knowledge of Hebrew. If not, there is a Mechina program, which we have now, but we didn't have in those years. If Hebrew was taught then, it was on a rather superficial level. Now I think the Hebrew requirement is taken more seriously. In my opinion, not yet seriously enough, but it's definitely an improvement over what it was in those years. The faculty, the student body is much greater. There's a recognition that you can't put someone with no background in the same class with someone with a year or 2 or 3 years of background. So that's definitely a difference from then to now. The academy is much more widely known, and I think it's much more respected as a serious school, and people have heard about it. I mentioned the academy to various friends colleagues, and I would say most of them have heard about it. They might still ask me, is that the school in Riverdale? So I'd say, no, it moved recently to Yonkers. But the fact that they remember or know that it was in Riverdale is already an indication that we've made it out there in terms of publicity.
Right. What would you describe as your legacy? It's building.
Well, I hope it's not the legacy of the past. It's hopefully a continuing one, and I think it's very important that a school that considers itself pluralistic should include someone who's Orthodox, and I take pride in being an integral part of the academy and being Orthodox, and being open to others who are not Orthodox. I think in our within the Orthodox community, you have modern Orthodox, you have those who are considered Haredi Orthodox, meaning more rightward swing. We have people with a strict yeshiva background and Hasidic background. And I think that over the years, we've learned to get along well together. Right now, I think I'm the only Orthodox faculty member, but there were times when we had one or two others. I think Rabbi Mayor Fund was part of the faculty years ago. Rabbi Wolgerlanter, who was of blessed memory, who was rabbi of Young Israel in Manhattan. He taught at the academy. So there were times when we had more than one Orthodox faculty member. We had some in the administration also who were Orthodox. I think Sandy considers herself Orthodox now. So I think that that it's not just, I'm not the only one who is quote unquote Orthodox, but we've had a history of being inclusive, but we're still, I don't know if it's fair to say I'm the token Orthodox faculty member. It would be nice if there would be more, but still I feel that I'm part of the school and I'm respected, and my opinions are mean something, and I think that's important. I think that if you want to know what could improve, I think that there could be a greater sense of a recognition that to be truly pluralistic, you have to respect some of the restrictions, especially when it comes to prayer, that comes with being frum or Orthodox. I remember a few years ago when I was saying Kaddish. I think it was the yahrzeit of my mother, Aleh Shalom, and when I pray, if it's in a formal setting, and there are women there, we have a mechitza, partition, and I remember that there were some students who felt uneasy about that, and David Greenstein was the Rosh HaYeshiva at that time, the head, and he told the students to be truly pluralistic, you have to also accept the Orthodox way of prayer. So we built some kind of a mechitza, partition, but I felt that the fact that he had to appeal to them to be tolerant about that, even though they were not used to it, and because the extent of the pluralism was which siddur you're going to use. That was the level of pluralism. But what if you had to put women on one side and men on the other? That there was already some kind of objection to it. But it was done, and no one complained to me afterwards. But I just felt that I'm kind of imposing my way of prayer on people who aren't used to it and don't accept it, and it's almost like a something that goes against their very grain. But other than that incident, I don't think that there's been any problem. And I've also personally bent over backwards to present, to the extent that I can, other views on when it comes to halacha and practice, that the conservative view might be different than the view that I'm presenting. I'm presenting a more traditional view, and everyone knows that. But be aware that if you read Klein's book, you're going to get a somewhat different view, or some of the other books on halacha that are out there. One of the things I would tell an incoming student is that the Academy can provide a great education. It can teach you tolerance, respect for other people's religious views with regard to Judaism and religion in general, and that you get a chance to meet wonderful people, many who are making midlife career changes, and that's something to respect and value. But I would also caution an incoming student that you have to be open to the idea that there are different ways of reaching the ideal when it comes to being a rabbi or a cantor, and that if you are too focused just on one way, then it's not the right school for you. You have to be open to the idea of learning from other people that are, as we say, Duracheha Darchei Noam, the ways of the Torah, ways of pleasantness. So you have to recognize that there are Duracheha, its ways. There are many ways, not just one. And if you're willing to accept that, then it might be the right school for you. Well, my prayer for the future of the Academy is that the Academy should continue to grow and prosper. It should go mechayel el chayel, from strength to strength. It should be able to continue on its path of attracting students who are making changes in the middle of their careers. I think it's one of the greatest strengths of the Academy is that it makes older students feel comfortable there. It values life experience, and it also tailors its schedule and the courses to some extent for those who have other responsibilities. Unlike schools like the seminary, yeshiva, Hebrew Union College, the Reconstructionist School, where most of the students come in within a year or 2 years, or maybe even 3 years after graduating from college, so they're in their late teens or early 20s. What is really special about the Academy is we have students in their 30s, 40s, 50s. I think there was one student who came in, or at least he finished in his 60s, and we um, they they felt a certain sense of comradeship. They felt that they could relate to one another. It's very hard for a 50-year-old to relate to a 20-year-old. You know, when you're 20 years old and you don't have family responsibilities, you can devote all of your time to your studies, then it's a lot different than when you're older and your memory isn't as good as it used to be, and it's harder to absorb languages. Then you feel that you can't compete with someone like that. But at the Academy, everybody was made to feel welcome, and I think there was a recognition that we can't have classes, let's say, 4 days a week, because some students have to work, some students have families to take care of, congregations to serve. Talking about congregations to serve, that was also a very important part of the training, and is a very important part of the training of the students, that they are getting experience while they are studying. So it's sort of like some professional schools where you have internship at the same time that you're having formal studies in school, and I think that's something that is to the credit of the Academy. So that which is strong and that which works, my blessing is that that should continue. And some of the things that might need a little bit of refinement, like I mentioned earlier, about having maybe a little bit more of an Orthodox input, that can, I think, be fixed.
The faculty relationships.
With regard to faculty relationship, I think I have a wonderful relationship with, I don't want to say most of the faculty, because that would imply that there are some that I don't have a good relationship, but I respect everyone, and one of the problems or issues or challenges, might be the best word, is to have a greater opportunity for faculty to get to know one another. Even at the faculty meetings that we have, which are 2 or 3 times a year, not everyone's able to come. We all have our schedules, so we don't get to meet everyone, and we don't have the opportunity to learn from one another. But I think if there could be a greater emphasis on intercollegial relationship and learning one from the other, I think it would benefit all of us. And I think that maybe there should be a greater amount of encouragement to have the faculty get to know one another. Sometimes there are people I meet at ordination, I didn't even know they're on the faculty, and not everyone comes to ordination. So that's one area of, I think, of improvement that we could focus on. One of the enduring legacies, if you can call it that, that I take a lot of pride in, is the positive influence that I've had on the students. You mentioned to me how it's the students have great admiration for me, and feelings are mutual, and it reminds me of one student in particular. I hope she doesn't mind that I mention her name, and that is Shohama, was one of my early students, and then, of course, as you know, became the president of the school. And in public, she mentioned once that it's because of my influence that she turned her kitchen into a kosher kitchen, and that was one of the high points of feeling of gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for that opportunity, that I could actually impact someone to such an extent that they become kosher. I'm sure maybe she was kosher style and then became actually kosher. And I'm sure there were others as well who perhaps I had some influence on their becoming more religious, more spiritual, more observant, and that I consider something of great pride, having been associated with the Academy for so long, and hopefully continue. I would also suggest for the that one of the improvements that would be helpful for the Academy, especially now that we have different levels, different tiers of studies, would be to, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have enough integration of faculty working with one another. That should be something that would help not only the faculty getting to know one another, but it would help the programs, the biblical program, the Talmudic program, the rabbinic studies, the cantorial studies in general, to have some kind of a sense of integration of the different courses, so that not everyone is teaching his course or her course in isolation from the others. And that's something that has come up often at faculty meetings, but it's something that we still need to work on to create a kind of a program where you go from first year, second year, third year, and so on, all the way to ordination, where you know that you've covered the material that a rabbi should know in a way that it's integrated, so that whatever you study in halacha goes well with what you're studying in Talmud, and I'm not sure how I would connect that with the cantorial subject, but along those lines, the Bible and Talmud and Jewish law could be better integrated. But that is a goal I know that we're working on, and in all my years of experience at the Academy, I don't think we've ever really resolved it in a satisfactory way, but I think it's something that we can ultimately reach out for. So in conclusion, I would say that it's been a wonderful experience teaching, and also I've formed, I think, everlasting relationships with some of my students, and it's always a pleasure to see them, to meet with them. And I don't think there is a single student that I would not feel a sense of warmth and a sense of devotion to. There are some, Paul Hoffman and Erwin Huberman and others who I continue to work with and to teach, and many of the students have developed a real love for Talmud, and they continue to study well after ordination. And I think if I played a role in inspiring them with that love, then that is a great achievement and perhaps one of the most enduring legacies.